He stood on tiptoe, clutching a crumpled envelope tighter than life itself, as 3 bank officials smirked down at him. "Triple what balance, kid? You can't even spell deposit." Their laughter echoed, but none of them knew the truth hiding behind his trembling hands. "Hello, my amazing family and friends. I'm so glad you're here with me again today. If you're ready to dive into another powerful story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me the country or city you're watching from. And guess what? Tomorrow, I've got another story lined up that will leave you just as captivated, so don't miss it. Now, let's get started. The marble floor of the First Union Bank gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, but to the boy, it felt cold, unfriendly, even cruel. His name was Jamal, and at just 8 years old, he looked far smaller against the towering counters and the stern faces peering over them. His sneakers were scuffed, his jeans worn thin at the knees, but his eyes, those wide brown eyes, held a determination the clerks chose not to see. Behind the counter, Robert, a mid-level bank officer with a starched shirt and a voice dipped in sarcasm, leaned to whisper something to his colleague, sending both of them into a fit of chuckles. "Kid thinks he's got money," Robert muttered. "Probably $1 in quarters." Jamal heard them, every word. His small fingers dug into the envelope as though it could shield him from the sting. He had promised his grandmother he'd be brave, that he'd walk into this bank like a man and not back down until he'd made the deposit. She told him this envelope was important, more important than anything he could imagine, and Jamal had believed her. Still, the weight of the stares, the mocking smiles, made his throat tighten. He pressed forward anyway, resting the envelope on the cool surface of the counter. His voice came out small but steady. "I need to put this money in." The room stilled. For a moment, the clerks stopped laughing. Robert arched an eyebrow, plucked the envelope, and opened it with a smirk that quickly slipped when he saw the neatly stacked bills inside. His eyes flickered with something, disbelief, maybe even fear. But he covered it quickly with a forced chuckle. "Where did you get this, kid?" he asked, his tone laced with accusation. Jamal lifted his chin, trying not to cry, trying not to falter. "It's from my grandma. She said you should put it safe. And if you have a balance, she'll pay triple." The words hit the air with strange weight, leaving the clerks silent, exchanging uneasy glances. And in that moment, everything began to change. Robert blinked, his smirk fading into something closer to irritation. "Triple? Triple what balance?" he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked around at the other tellers, expecting them to laugh again, but the room had grown strangely quiet. The head teller, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia, folded her arms. "Listen, kid, this isn't a playground. Banks aren't games, and you can't just walk in here talking nonsense about paying triple." Jamal swallowed hard, the envelope still in Patricia's hand. "It's not nonsense," he said softly. "Grandma told me. She told me to say it just like that. She said you'd understand." The fluorescent lights buzzed above, the sound mixing with the faint click of keyboards and the impatient sigh of customers waiting in line behind him. Someone muttered, "Hurry it up, some of us got jobs." Patricia shot a glare toward the line, then leaned closer to Jamal. "Sweetheart, where's your grandma? Did she send you here alone?" "Yes, ma'am," Jamal replied. His small voice didn't waver, even though his knees trembled. "She said it was time. She said you'd know what to do." Patricia frowned, her fingers tapping against the counter. Robert opened the envelope wider and pulled out a neat bundle of hundreds. The sight drew gasps from a couple of people in line. "Holy," Robert caught himself, his voice cracking. "There's at least 10 grand in here. Where do you say you live, kid?" The boy's chest puffed a little. "I didn't say." For the first time, the clerks didn't know whether to laugh or call security. $10,000 in the hands of an 8-year-old black boy. It didn't make sense. Patricia's eyes narrowed, suspicion battling with something else, curiosity. Before she could press him further, the glass doors of the bank swung open. A hush fell over the lobby. An older woman stepped in, her gait steady but slow, her cane clicking softly against the tile. She wore a faded blue dress, the kind that had been patched more than once, and her silver hair was wrapped in a simple scarf. Yet despite the modesty of her clothes, she carried herself with quiet authority. "Grandma," Jamal whispered, relief flooding his voice. The boy's shoulders relaxed as she reached him. She placed a gentle hand on his back, her presence silencing the room even more than the bundle of money had. Patricia cleared her throat. Ma'am, is this your grandson? Yes, he is, the woman said. Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried weight. And that is our deposit. He told you what I told him to say. The clerks nodded, uneasily. Good, she said, her gaze steady. Then you'd best listen carefully. Because what I told him is no child's mistake. If you have a balance, if this bank carries what belongs to me, I'll pay triple. Right here. Right now. Murmurs rippled through the line. Customers craned their necks, some whispering, others just staring. Robert's mouth twisted into a skeptical smile. Lady, that's not how banking works. You can't just walk in here with cash and… Son, she cut in, her voice firm but not unkind. Don't lecture me on how banks work. I've lived long enough to know exactly how they work. Better than you ever will. Her words landed heavy, carrying a history none of them could yet see. Jamal looked up at her with awe, and for the first time since stepping inside, he wasn't afraid. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Something about the woman's tone, the way she spoke as though she had walked through storms no one else had survived, made her uneasy. Let's step into my office, Patricia finally said. We'll sort this out in private. The grandmother nodded, her hand never leaving Jamal's back. Together they followed Patricia, leaving behind the buzz of murmurs and wide-eyed stares. As the office door closed behind them, the little boy exhaled, finally daring to believe he was safe. But he didn't know that what his grandmother was about to reveal would shake not just the bank, but every person inside it. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and ink, the kind of smell that clung to places where money moved, but never touched the hands of people like Jamal and his grandmother. Patricia gestured stiffly toward 2 chairs across from her desk. The grandmother guided Jamal to sit first, then lowered herself beside him, leaning her cane against the desk. Her eyes scanned the office, every corner, every detail, like she was measuring the place, taking its weight. Patricia smoothed the fabric of her blazer, trying to regain control. Ma'am, let's start with your name. My name, the older woman said, her voice measured, is Evelyn Turner. Patricia clicked her pen and scribbled it down. All right, Mrs. Turner. And this money, where exactly did it come from? Evelyn leaned back, her hands folded calmly in her lap. That envelope came from my house. Earned over years of sweat, saving, denying myself comforts so that my family might have a future. Every dollar is honest. But you already knew that, didn't you? Patricia frowned. I don't know anything yet, Mrs. Turner. All I see is a large cash deposit carried into my bank by a minor, with a cryptic message attached. You can understand why that raises questions. Jamal's small voice cut in before his grandmother could reply. She told me to say it just like that. About the balance. I did it right, didn't I, Grandma? Evelyn turned to him with the faintest smile, her eyes softening. You did it perfectly, baby. Her hand squeezed his. Then she turned back to Patricia. And as for your questions, what you should be asking yourself isn't where the money came from. What you should be asking is why I know about a balance you've been hoping nobody remembers. The words fell heavy between them. Patricia's pen stopped mid-scribble. Her eyes darted up. Excuse me. Evelyn didn't flinch. I said, the only thing you need to decide today is whether you admit the truth or keep hiding it. Because I promise you, the truth will rise either way. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze sharp. I walked into this bank 40 years ago with my husband. His name was Henry Turner. He wore his best suit that day, shoes shined till they gleamed. He brought every paper you folks demanded, every form, every document signed. And he put money into this bank, money you've been holding all these years. Patricia blinked, her composure faltering. 40 years. Mrs. Turner, I am not finished, Evelyn said, her voice ringing with quiet thunder. We put our faith here because we believed faith was enough. But then my Henry died, working himself into the ground, and when I came back here with my papers and my tears, your people told me that no such account existed, that no such balance was recorded. You thought because I was a black woman, grieving and alone, you could erase what belonged to us. You thought we'd forget. Jamal's hand tightened around hers. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. His grandma had been wronged, deeply wronged, and now she was standing in the place that tried to take everything. Patricia's throat went dry. She shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tapping against the desk. Mrs. Turner, you have to understand, Records from decades ago aren't always. Sometimes banks merge, accounts transfer, documentation. Documentation doesn't vanish in a thin air, Evelyn cut in. And even if your paper's burned, the truth is still alive. You carry it in your books, in your ledgers, in the very walls of this building. You owe me, and you know it. Which is why I said what I said. If you have a balance, if you still carry what belongs to me, I'll pay triple. I'll cover every cent threefold. All I want is acknowledgement. All I want is the truth. Patricia pressed her lips together. For the first time in years of dealing with clients, she felt cornered, not by hostility, but by raw truth. She tried to mask her unease. Mrs. Turner, do you have any paperwork at all? Any proof of this account? Evelyn leaned back slowly, her eyes narrowing. Paperwork? You think a woman like me kept paper safe through house fires, through storms, through eviction notices? You think I had the luxury of steel cabinets and fireproof safes? The only proof I've got is the same proof my husband carried when he first came here, his word and my word. And believe me when I tell you, our word is stronger than anything you've filed away in your dusty drawers. The office was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Jamal stared at his grandmother, mesmerized by her strength. Patricia shifted again, her pen trembling slightly as she tried to regain control. Mrs. Turner, I understand your frustration, but without documentation, I can't. Can't what? Evelyn interrupted. Can't admit your bank took money from a black man and decided his family didn't matter? Can't admit that for decades you've been profiting from what you claimed never existed? You don't need my paperwork. You need to check your conscience. There was a knock at the office door. Patricia called. Come in, her voice tighter than before. Robert stepped in, his expression pale. Patty. You might want to see this. He held a folder in his hand, thick with papers, his usual smirk nowhere in sight. Patricia snatched it, flipping through quickly. Her eyes scanned rows of faded type, ledgers, account numbers, handwritten notes. Her skin grew cold. There it was, Henry Turner. Deposits, signatures, balances carried over. Everything Evelyn had claimed. Buried deep in records, not erased after all. Evelyn watched her face change, watched the color drain from her cheeks. Found it, didn't you? She said quietly. Patricia set the papers down slowly, her hand trembling. This isn't possible. These records were supposed to be archived. Robert looked uneasy. They were. In the basement storage. I don't know how they even. Because truth has a way of surfacing, Evelyn said, her voice steady. No matter how far down you bury it. Patricia sat back, stunned. She couldn't deny what she held in her hands. The account was real. The balance was real. Decades of accrued interest stared back at her like a ghost. Evelyn reached forward, her hand trembling but firm as she tapped the papers. Now you see why I said what I said. I'll pay triple if you have a balance. And here it is. I kept my promise. Now keep yours. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Jamal sat taller in his chair, pride swelling in his chest. His grandma hadn't been crazy, hadn't been clinging to a dream. She had been right all along. Patricia exhaled shakily, her professional mask cracking. Mrs. Turner, this balance, with interest, we're talking hundreds of thousands. Maybe more. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then you understand the gravity of what you've hidden. My husband died never knowing his family was secure, because of you. My children grew up struggling, because of you. And now my grandson stands here, watching how justice can be delayed but never denied. Patricia's eyes darted to Jamal. The boy's wide gaze pierced through her like a judgment. She swallowed hard. Mrs. Turner, I don't know what to say. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice a whisper yet stronger than any shout. Then say nothing. Do the right thing. And remember this moment the next time a child walks through your door, holding an envelope. Remember that mocking can turn to shame quicker than you expect. Jamal looked at his grandmother with awe, his small hand gripping hers tightly. He felt taller somehow, braver, like her strength was seeping into him. Outside the office, the bank lobby buzzed with rumors. Customers whispered about the boy with the envelope, about the old woman who walked in like she owned the place. And though they didn't yet know the full truth, they could feel it. Something powerful was unfolding, something no one could stop. And for the first time in decades, Evelyn Turner allowed herself a smile. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The lobby of First Union Bank pulsed with murmurs. Customers stood restless in line, next craning toward the frosted glass of Patricia's office, where secrets long buried were now bleeding into the open. Jamal pressed his cheek lightly against his grandmother's arm, comforted by her warmth, while Evelyn sat steady, her chin lifted, her eyes sharp. Patricia stared at the faded papers spread across her desk, each line of ink screaming a truth she wished she hadn't seen. Robert shifted nervously near the door, scratching his neck. "Patty, what are we supposed to do? This is huge." Patricia snapped her eyes up at him. "Shut the door." Robert obeyed, clicking it shut, the sound echoing like a final verdict. Patricia lowered her voice. "If this goes public, the bank could face lawsuits. Do you understand what's at stake? Decades of negligence, of theft," Evelyn said calmly, her words slicing through the air. "Call it what it is." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Turner, please. This isn't as simple as you think. Banks merge, records get lost, names misfiled. It doesn't mean there was malice." Evelyn's eyes burned. "Tell that to the woman who buried her husband and raised children on scraps. Tell that to me every time I went without heat in the winter because I thought I had nothing left. Don't dress it up, Miss Patricia. You robbed me." Jamal's fists clenched. His small voice trembled but didn't break. "They laughed at me, Grandma. They laughed when I said the words you told me to. They thought I was dumb." Evelyn stroked his hair, her voice softening for him. "You're not dumb, baby. You're the bravest boy I know. You walked in here and told the truth, even when they mocked you. That makes you stronger than any of them." Patricia swallowed, shame flickering across her face. She tried to hold on to professionalism, but Evelyn's words hit deeper than any ledger ever could. Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we can make a settlement, Patty. Quiet. No noise." Evelyn's laugh was dry, bitter. "A settlement? You think silence is what I came for?" "No, son. I came for justice. I came so my grandson would see that lies don't win forever." Patricia ran a hand through her hair, the pressure mounting. "Mrs. Turner, please lower your voice. We'll handle this. I'll escalate it to corporate, but—" "No," Evelyn interrupted. Her hand pressed the desk, firm. "You'll handle it here. Today. I didn't drag this child down here just to be told to wait another 40 years. My husband's name is in those records, and I'll see his balance restored before I walk out of this office." Her eyes didn't waver. Jamal stared at her, all lighting up his face. Outside the office, a man in a suit had been watching. He wasn't a teller or a clerk. He was the branch manager, Michael Reynolds, and the rumors had already reached his ears. He approached with quick, deliberate steps and opened the door without knocking. "What's going on here?" Michael demanded, his presence filling the small office. His salt and pepper hair framed a face that had spent too many years hiding behind contracts and policies. Patricia stiffened. "Mr. Reynolds, She was just trying to explain away theft," Evelyn said smoothly, her eyes locking onto his. "Maybe you'll do better." Michael's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Evelyn Turner," she said. "The widow of a man your bank erased. Until today." Michael's gaze flicked to the papers on the desk. His jaw clenched. "Where did you get those?" "Your own clerk dug them up," Evelyn said, tilting her chin toward Robert. "Truth doesn't stay buried, Mr. Reynolds. Not forever." The manager's face hardened. He turned to Patricia. "You should have brought this to me immediately." I was just trying to," Patricia stammered. "Silence," he snapped, then turned back to Evelyn. His tone shifted, smooth but icy. "Mrs. Turner, I can see this is very emotional for you. But these documents don't guarantee anything. Old ledgers, handwritten notes, they're not legally binding." Jamal flinched at the coldness in his voice, but Evelyn didn't blink. She leaned forward, her eyes like steel. "Do you hear yourself, sir? Hiding behind technicalities while you sit on money that was never yours. My Henry trusted you, and you made sure his trust killed him. That's what banks like yours do. You bleed folks dry and call it business." Michael bristled, but Evelyn's voice only grew steadier, stronger, echoing with decades of pain and defiance. "I told my grandson to say those words when he walked through your door because I knew you'd try to deny him. I knew you'd laugh. But I also knew once you looked, once you saw, you couldn't hide anymore. I'll pay triple, I said. Triple, because I wanted to remind you there are still people whose word carries more weight than your ledgers." Michael exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Turner, you need to calm down." "Calm?" she repeated, her laugh sharp. Calm is what you told my husband when you delayed him week after week. Calm is what you told me when you sent me away with nothing. Don't tell me to calm down when I've waited a lifetime for this moment. The air in the office thickened, the tension bleeding into the hall. Customers pressed closer to the glass, trying to catch pieces of the storm unfolding inside. Michael looked down at Jamal, who stared back with defiance far beyond his years. For the first time, Michael hesitated. Something about that child's gaze unsettled him. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a faded photograph, edges frayed with time. She slid it across the desk. It showed Henry Turner in his best suit, standing proudly outside the same bank doors, a deposit slip in his hand. "This was the day you took his money," Evelyn said quietly. "He believed in you. He believed so much he posed for a picture, told me this was the start of something better. And you turned it into ashes. So tell me now, Mr. Reynolds, will you honor him, or will you keep pretending?" Michael stared at the photograph. For a moment, something cracked in his expression, a flicker of shame, or maybe recognition. His voice, when it came, was lower. "I'll need time to review this." "You've had 40 years, Evelyn said firmly. "The time is now." Jamal's little voice rose, clear and piercing. "You can't keep it anymore. It's ours." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked at the boy, at the strength in his grandmother's face, at the damning papers on the desk. He straightened slowly, jaw tight. "I'll have to make some calls." "Do it," Evelyn said. "And remember, every minute you delay, this child is watching. He'll remember if his grandmother's truth was denied again." Michael left the office stiffly, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Patricia exhaled, her hands trembling, while Robert stood frozen, guilt and fear written across his face. Evelyn sat back, her hand finding Jamal's once more, her thumb brushing over his small fingers. "You did good today," she whispered to him. "Whatever happens next, know this. You stood tall when they tried to make you small." Jamal nodded, his chest swelling with quiet pride. And though the battle was only beginning, Evelyn knew one thing. The walls of the bank were already shaking. The air in the bank felt different the moment Michael Reynolds walked out of the office. Customers could sense it, tellers could sense it, and Jamal felt it most of all. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath. He leaned closer to his grandmother, whispering, "Are they going to give it back, Grandma?" Evelyn smoothed his hair, her hands steady. "They'll try not to, baby. That's what people like them do. But we've planted the seed. Now let's see if it grows." Patricia fiddled with her pen, her hands shaky. She couldn't look at Evelyn directly. Robert stood near the door, bouncing on his heels, unsure whether to stay or leave. Finally, he muttered, "I'm going to go see what Reynolds is doing," and slipped out, his nerves betraying him. Evelyn sat still, her eyes never leaving Patricia. "You remind me of myself once," she said softly. Patricia blinked, startled. "Me? How?" "You sit here, trapped in the rules they hand you, too scared to ask if those rules are right," Evelyn replied. "I know that feeling. But one day, it catches up with you. And when it does, it won't be numbers in a ledger that haunt you. It'll be faces." Patricia shifted uncomfortably, swallowing hard. She wanted to argue, but something about the weight of Evelyn's words pressed too heavy against her chest. Before she could speak, the office door burst open. Michael returned, his expression harder, his tie loosened. Two men in dark suits followed him, corporate representatives, by the looks of it. Their briefcases clicked open as they set them on the desk, papers spilling like armor. "Mrs. Turner," Michael said, voice clipped. "This is Mr. Wallace and Mr. Jennings from Regional Corporate. They'll be handling this matter from here." The taller of the two, Mr. Wallace, adjusted his glasses. "We've reviewed the situation briefly, and we want to make clear, while we understand your frustration, Mrs. Turner, there is no legal obligation for the bank to honor outdated accounts without proper documentation. These records are insufficient. You cannot prove ownership." Jamal's face flushed red. He stood on his chair, his voice breaking. "She just showed you proof. It's right there. My grandpa's name, his money, everything. Why won't you listen?" The men glanced at him, dismissive. Mr. Jennings leaned forward, speaking as though to a child. "Son, things aren't always that simple. Sometimes what's written down doesn't mean it's real." Jamal's small fists balled. "It is real. My grandma never lies. Not ever." Evelyn rose slowly, her cane pressing into the carpet, her figure straight despite her years. You think you can gaslight me the same way you did 40 years ago? I buried a husband because of the hours he worked, the sweat he gave, while this bank fattened itself on his earnings. Don't tell me what's real. I lived it. The room crackled with tension. Patricia stared down at her hands, unable to lift her eyes. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat, his tone condescending. We sympathize, Mrs. Turner, but sympathy doesn't equal liability. Legally, you have no claim. Evelyn's voice turned cold. Legally, I may not. But morally? Spiritually? Before the eyes of my grandson and every person standing outside that glass. I have every claim, and you'll answer for it. Michael's jaw clenched. We're done here. Mrs. Turner, I'll have to ask you to leave the premises. The words sent a sharp sting through Jamal's chest. You can't make us leave, he shouted. His voice cracked, but it carried more weight than any grown man's could have. This is our money. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. We're not leaving, baby. Not yet. She turned to Michael, her eyes piercing. You want me gone? Call the police. Let them drag an old woman out in front of your customers. Let this child watch you put handcuffs on his grandmother for daring to ask for what's hers. Go ahead. Show the world who you are. The words silenced the room. Even Michael faltered, his eyes flicking toward the crowd gathering outside the office door. Customers pressed close to the glass, phones out, cameras raised. Whispers surged like waves. Patricia finally found her voice, trembling but clear. Mr. Reynolds, maybe we shouldn't. Quiet, Michael snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. His forehead beaded with sweat. Evelyn took a step forward, her cane tapping against the floor. You see? The tide's already turning. 40 years ago, you could dismiss me. Now, your lies are trapped on 100 little screens. She gestured toward the glass, where phones glittered in curious hands. History won't let you bury me again. Jamal looked up at her, his chest swelling with pride. She wasn't just his grandma. She was a warrior, a storm in a faded blue dress. Mr. Wallace bristled, his face tightening. You can't strong-arm us with theatrics. Banks don't bend to emotion. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Banks bend to pressure. And right now, every eye in this place is watching. You think they'll keep trusting you when they see how you rob children of their inheritance? When they see how you laugh in the face of truth? The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Even Michael couldn't find words. The weight of Evelyn's defiance filled every corner of the room. Then, for the first time since walking in, Evelyn turned to her grandson, her voice softer but still strong. Baby, do you remember what your grandpa used to say about planting seeds? Jamal nodded. He said if you plant them deep and water them, they'll grow even when nobody's watching. That's right, she said, her eyes misting. Your grandpa planted a seed here long ago. They tried to bury it, but look around. It's growing again. Her words hit Patricia like a blow. She pushed her chair back, her hands trembling. Mr. Reynolds, I can't. This isn't right. We can't just pretend. Michael shot her a glare. You'll stay out of this. But Patricia shook her head, her voice breaking. No, not this time. She's right. We mocked that boy. We laughed at him when he spoke the truth. And now we're about to push them out like they don't matter? I won't do it. Gasps rippled through the glass. Evelyn's eyes softened for the first time toward Patricia. That's it, child. That's the face you'll remember. Not numbers, not ledgers, but the face of a boy who stood here with nothing but truth. Michael's control was slipping. The pressure of eyes, the moral weight pressing down, the silent cameras recording every second, it was too much. He slammed his palm on the desk. Enough. This meeting is over. But Evelyn didn't move. Jamal didn't move. And Patricia, trembling, stayed planted in her chair. The resistance had begun, and the bank was no longer in control. The doors of the office slammed shut, but the sound wasn't enough to drown out the murmurs outside. The glass walls became a barrier and a stage at the same time. Dozens of faces pressed closer, their phones raised higher, their whispers rising into audible protests. Evelyn and Jamal were no longer just two customers. They had become the center of the bank's storm. Michael Reynolds tightened his jaw, signaling to the security guard hovering nearby. Clear the lobby. Now. The guard hesitated, his eyes flicking between Evelyn and the child clinging to her hand. He wasn't used to removing old women or children. But Michael's voice cracked like a whip. Do it. The guard stepped forward, but Jamal clutched Evelyn tighter, his small voice loud enough to cut through the tension. "You're scared. That's why you want us gone. Because you know we're right." The crowd outside erupted. Some gasped, others cheered, phones capturing every second. Patricia flinched, pressing her hand against her mouth, realizing how quickly the situation had spiraled out of Michael's control. "Sit down," Evelyn commanded softly, guiding Jamal back into the chair. Her eyes never left Michael's. "We're not leaving. Not until the truth is written down, black and white, where the world can see it." Mr. Wallace leaned in, his face twisted with irritation. "Mrs. Turner, this spectacle won't get you what you want. You're embarrassing yourself." "No," Evelyn replied, her voice low but carrying. "I'm embarrassing you, and you deserve every bit of it." Michael rubbed his temples. "Security," he barked again, but before the guard could move, Patricia's voice broke through. "Stop," she shouted, surprising everyone, including herself. Her voice wavered, but it didn't break. "You can't drag them out. Look outside, Michael. Do you see them? Do you hear them? If you force this, it won't just be news tomorrow. It'll be viral in an hour. Do you want to be remembered as the man who mocked a child and tried to erase his family's legacy?" Michael spun toward her, fury flashing. "Patricia." But Patricia stood now, trembling yet unyielding. "I've worked here 10 years, Michael. I've seen the way this bank buries mistakes. But this is different. That boy walked in here with truth, and we laughed in his face. We can't bury this." The crowd outside reacted like a live audience. Claps, murmurs, shouts of support. Some chanted, "Let them speak. Let them speak." Evelyn squeezed Jamal's shoulder. "Hear that, baby? The world's voice is louder than theirs." Jamal smiled faintly, though his eyes glistened. He whispered, "Grandpa would be proud." Michael's face burned crimson. "Everyone calm down. This is private business, not a circus." But his voice cracked under the weight of the spectacle unraveling around him. The corporate men exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Jennings leaned toward Wallace. "If this spreads further, the damage control will be a nightmare. We need to contain it." Wallace hissed back, "Then contain it. But we can't let her win." The crowd outside the glass had grown. Even customers who had finished their banking stayed glued to the scene, phones pointed like weapons. One elderly man pressed his palm against the glass and called out, "Give the lady her money." His voice ignited a ripple. Others joined, banging softly on the glass, their chants growing. The bank lobby had turned into a courtroom, and Evelyn stood at its center, dignified and immovable. Patricia crossed her arms, her fear dissolving into resolve. "Michael, if you call security again, I'll walk out. And I'll tell everyone exactly what happened in this office. Every word." Michael froze. Patricia had been loyal for years, but now she stood against him, and the whole room saw it. Evelyn leaned on her cane, her voice steady, each word like a nail hammered into truth. "You mocked my grandson. You laughed at him when he spoke the words his grandfather taught him. You tried to bury us in papers and legal threats. But look at you now, surrounded, exposed. This is the balance you never counted on." Jamal's chest swelled with pride as he looked around. For the first time since stepping into the towering bank, he didn't feel small. He felt seen, heard. The official's facade was cracking. The corporate men adjusted their ties, whispering frantic calculations about reputation, lawsuits, exposure. Patricia stood tall, a quiet rebellion glowing in her eyes. And Evelyn, with her cane planted firmly, had turned the very walls of the bank against them. The doors were locked, the cameras were rolling, and the truth was no longer contained. The officials thought they had forced Evelyn and Jamal into a corner. But what they hadn't realized was that corners could become stages, and this one was lit brighter than any courtroom. And as the chants outside grew louder, the balance of power inside the bank began to shift. The chants outside the office glass grew louder, shaking the walls of the bank like thunder rolling in. Evelyn stood tall, her hand resting on Jamal's shoulder, while Patricia remained by the desk, trembling but refusing to sit back down. Michael's face was drenched in sweat, his collar tight around his neck as if the very air had turned against him. The corporate men, Wallace and Jennings, exchanged frantic whispers, their voices barely audible over the roar of customers demanding justice. But Evelyn was silent. She let the chaos rise and swell like a storm. She knew storms had a way of revealing who people truly were. "Mrs. Turner," Jennings finally said, forcing his voice above the noise. We understand you've made serious accusations. But accusations are not evidence. What you're doing right now is putting this entire institution at risk. Do you understand the legal consequences of? Evelyn's eyes cut to him like a blade. Don't lecture me about consequences, son. I've lived through more consequences than you can fit in your legal textbooks. I buried a husband who spent his life building trust with a bank that broke it. I raised children through lean years when your policies drained us of what we rightfully earned. And now I'm here with my grandson, who you mocked, laughed at, and tried to humiliate. You want evidence? She pointed to the glass, where dozens of phones were aimed their way. Every second of your cruelty is already recorded. That's your evidence. The room fell heavy. Wallace rubbed his temple, muttering under his breath, "This is spiraling." Jamal's small voice broke through the tension. You all laughed at me, but my grandpa told me to say those words because he believed someone in this bank would still have a heart. He looked at Patricia, his dark eyes shining. Maybe he was talking about you. Patricia blinked, her throat tightening. She glanced away quickly, but everyone could see the truth pressing at her chest. Michael slammed his fist on the table, trying to regain control. Enough. This bank doesn't run on fairy tales and sympathy. We run on policies, procedures. And none of this changes the fact that what she's demanding is absurd. We don't owe you. Evelyn's cane struck the floor with a sharp crack, silencing him. Don't you dare say you don't owe me. My husband deposited his life here. His faith. His savings. And every time he asked for his balance, your people smiled in his face while they carved away at his trust. Year by year. Fee by fee. Disappearance by disappearance. Jennings sighed. Ma'am, those records are decades old. Even if there were errors. Errors. Evelyn's voice rose, trembling with fury. You think siphoning off a black man's life savings was an error? You think erasing his legacy, mocking his grandson, calling his wife delusional is an error? No, son. That's theft. That's a crime. The crowd outside the glass thundered in agreement. Crime. Crime. They chanted, fists pounding against the panels. Patricia, trembling, pulled a drawer open. Papers rustled as she searched, until her hand landed on a yellowed file at the back of the cabinet. She held it up, her voice breaking. She's telling the truth. Every head turned. Patricia's hands shook as she placed the file on the desk. I've seen these before. I didn't understand what they meant at first. But the accounts, they don't add up. There are withdrawals made under false signatures. Transfers to names that don't exist. It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. Michael's face turned pale. Patricia, shut your mouth. But Patricia's resolve had hardened. She shoved the file across the desk toward Evelyn. It's all here. The proof. The balances that were erased. The money that vanished. Evelyn placed a hand over the papers, but didn't open them yet. Instead, she looked directly at Michael. You see? The truth doesn't hide forever. You can bury it under paper, drown it in ink, but sooner or later, it rises. Michael lunged toward Patricia, but Jennings caught his arm. Stop it, Michael. You'll ruin us. It's already ruined, Patricia said sharply, her voice louder than her fear. The moment that boy walked in here and told the truth, this place was ruined. Because you thought mocking him was safer than listening. And now the world is listening instead. Jamal's small chest rose and fell as he turned to Evelyn. Grandma, does this mean we won? Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. No, baby. This means they've finally lost. Her words sank into the men like stones dropped into water. Wallace leaned back, defeated. Jennings buried his face in his hands. And Michael, his arrogance shattered, stared at the door as the chants grew louder, louder, like a wave preparing to crash. The balance Evelyn had demanded was no longer about numbers. It was about justice. About every family who had been laughed out of a lobby. Every child who had been told they didn't belong. Every dream robbed by greedy hands that believed silence would last forever. And as Patricia pushed the file closer, her trembling voice barely a whisper but clear enough for all to hear, she said, It's time the whole world saw what this bank has done. Evelyn nodded, her cane planted like a judge's gavel. Then let the truth be read aloud. The punishment wasn't coming from courts or laws. It was already unfolding. Exposure, humiliation, and the collapse of the fortress they thought would protect them. The crowd outside roared, a living jury delivering its verdict. Inside, the guilty sat cornered, the weight of their crimes pressing down like a sentence already passed. And Jamal, the little boy they mocked, sat taller than them all. The chants outside the office had become a rhythm, steady and unyielding, echoing through the glass like the beating of drums. Phones stayed raised, their red record lights blinking, capturing every second as if history was unfolding in real time. Evelyn stood tall at the center, her cane planted like a flag, while Jamal leaned against her leg, his eyes bright despite the fear that had shaken him earlier. Patricia clutched the old file like it was a burning torch, terrified, yet unwilling to let it go. Inside the office, the men sat cornered, their once commanding presence unraveling thread by thread. Jennings rubbed his face with both hands, muttering under his breath. Wallace tapped his pen furiously against the table, his jaw tight. And Michael, red-faced and seething, glared at Evelyn as though his eyes alone could burn her into silence. But silence wasn't hers to carry anymore. "You've been carrying this weight for decades," Patricia whispered to Evelyn, her voice trembling with guilt. "All while I sat behind this desk and typed your names into a system that was already lying to you. And I did nothing. I thought it wasn't my place to question. I thought if I kept quiet, it wasn't my responsibility." Evelyn turned her gaze toward her, not harsh, but steady. "And yet here you are, speaking." Patricia's throat tightened. "Too late." "No," Evelyn said softly. "Better late than never. The truth doesn't care how long it's been silenced. It only cares about who is brave enough to bring it out." Her words sank into Patricia, unraveling years of quiet complicity. Tears welled in her eyes as she glanced down at Jamal. "I can't change the past, but I can help him now. I can make sure the record is set straight. For him. For his future." Jamal studied her face, his small voice steady. "Grandma says when people do wrong, you can forgive them if they try to do right again. But you can't forgive if they keep hiding." Patricia's tears spilled, her voice cracking. "Your grandma's a wise woman." Evelyn smoothed her hand over Jamal's head, pride radiating in her eyes. "He's wise too. Wiser than many grown men in this room." Michael slammed his palm on the desk. "This is ridiculous. You think exposing some old file is going to undo the fact that this bank has power? You think a child's words and a crowd's chants mean anything in the grand scheme of things? We'll bury this, just like we buried every other problem." The words spilled venom, but they landed empty. The crowd outside erupted again, their chants piercing through the glass. "Truth, truth, truth." Patricia wiped her tears, her voice firmer now. "You can't bury anything anymore, Michael. Not with the world watching. Not with your face all over their cameras." Jennings leaned back, exhausted. "She's right," he muttered. "There's no covering this up. It's already out there. By tomorrow morning, every news station in the city will be running this story. The headline writes itself. Bank mocks black child, exposed by grandmother's legacy." Evelyn's hand tightened on her cane, but her voice softened, carrying a gentleness that contrasted the storm around her. "This isn't just about my husband's balance. It's about restoring dignity. About teaching my grandson that when the world laughs at you, you don't bow, you rise. You hold your truth higher than their scorn." Jamal looked up at her, his voice small but shining with awe. "Grandma, you're the strongest person I know." Her lips curved into a tired smile. "No, baby. Strength isn't just in me. It's in you too. You walked into this bank today and spoke words grown men were too afraid to say. You carried your grandfather's legacy without trembling. That's strength." For the first time, Jamal's chest puffed with something more than fear. He sat taller, his eyes flicking toward Michael, Wallace, and Jennings, no longer intimidated. "Grandpa trusted this bank. But I don't. And I don't trust you." The words were simple, but they landed with the force of a gavel. Jennings shifted uncomfortably. Wallace lowered his eyes. Even Michael, for a fraction of a second, faltered. Patricia bent down, her voice barely above a whisper, meant only for Jamal. "You remind me of my own son when he was your age. He used to ask me why the world treated some people differently. I never had the courage to give him a straight answer. But if he were here, he'd see you, and he'd know." Jamal tilted his head. "Know what?" "That the world changes," she whispered. "Slowly. Painfully. But it changes because of voices like yours." Evelyn laid a hand over Patricia's, sealing the moment. "And because of people like you. People who finally choose the right side." The bond between them was no longer fragile. It was forged in truth, in guilt turned into resolve, in a shared recognition of injustice that demanded redress. 3 generations of voices, grandmother, child, and reluctant witness, had woven together, forming something stronger than any contract or ledger. Outside, the crowd surged, chanting with raw power. The office vibrated with their fury and their hope. And for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel alone. She wasn't a tired widow fighting a faceless system. She was part of something larger, a chorus rising to demand accountability. Michael's voice, hoarse now, tried to cut through. You'll regret this. All of you. This little spectacle won't end in your favor. Mark my words. But his threats had grown small. His voice, once commanding, was drowned in the chorus of the people outside and the quiet conviction inside the room. Evelyn leaned toward him, her eyes steady as stone. No, son. You'll be the one with regrets. Because while you clung to power, you forgot the one truth that never changes. People always rise. Always. And Jamal, his small hand slipping into hers, whispered, "We're rising right now." The room fell into silence, not defeat, but transformation. The power no longer sat with the bank officials. It sat with Evelyn, Jamal, and the truth that had finally found its voice. The bond had been forged. The lines had been drawn, and the shatter point was closer than any of them realized. The office air felt thick, every breath dragging like smoke through the lungs. Outside the glass, the chants rattled louder, their rhythm shaking the once quiet bank into something resembling a protest march. The word truth ricocheted off walls, phones, and hearts alike, its sound refusing to be ignored. Evelyn stood like an oak in the storm, Jamal's small hand wrapped firmly around hers, Patricia beside them with the damning file still clutched in her trembling fingers. Then came the sound, sharp, metallic, deliberate. The front doors of the bank swung wide, and a flood of people surged inside, no longer content to watch through glass. Their voices echoed like a tidal wave as customers, onlookers, and even bystanders from the street poured in, their phones raised high, recording every angle of the confrontation. The guard who had been ordered to push them away now stood frozen, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The bank had lost control. Michael leapt to his feet, his face flushed red, veins bulging at his temples. "This is trespassing," he shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "You don't belong here. Everyone out now before I call the police." But his voice was swallowed whole by the chants. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Evelyn's eyes never wavered from him. She didn't need to shout. Her silence alone turned his fury into desperation. Jennings tugged nervously at his tie, his voice low but urgent. "Michael, stop yelling. Every camera in this room is catching you looking like a tyrant. Sit down before you dig us deeper." "I won't sit down." Michael barked, his spit flying. "This is my bank, my rules." "Your bank." Patricia snapped, her voice rising like it hadn't in years. She stood, squaring her shoulders. This bank was built on people like Evelyn's husband, on their sweat, their savings, their trust. You don't own it. You exploited it. You're the face of theft, Michael, not leadership. The crowd roared their approval, the walls shaking with applause and whistles. Jamal squeezed Evelyn's hand tighter, his voice piping up despite the thunder around him. "Grandma," he's scared. "Look at him." Evelyn's gaze was unflinching. "Yes, baby. That's the look of a man whose lies can't hold anymore." Michael's face twisted with rage. In a reckless surge, he reached across the desk, trying to snatch the file from Patricia's hands. Papers spilled to the floor in a flutter of old ink and broken secrets. The crowd gasped, their phones zooming in. Patricia cried out, but Evelyn moved faster than her age should have allowed, her cane slamming down across Michael's wrist with a sharp crack. The room froze. Even the chants faltered for a moment. Michael staggered back, clutching his wrist, his face pale now, not just with pain, but humiliation. Evelyn's voice rang through the silence. "You will not touch what belongs to my family. You will not erase one more name, one more dollar, one more legacy. Not while I breathe." The crowd erupted, their voices shaking the ceiling. "Not while she breathes. Not while she breathes." Jamal bent down quickly, gathering the scattered papers in his small hands. His eyes scanned the faded ink before he handed them to Patricia. "Here, don't lose them. Grandpa's words are in there." Patricia's hands trembled as she took them, clutching the pages to her chest like scripture. "They're safe," she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. Michael's composure cracked completely. He lunged again, but this time Jennings shoved him back with both hands, his voice trembling. "Enough. For God's sake, stop before you destroy us all." Wallace finally spoke, his tone grim. "It's too late. He already has. Look outside, look at their faces. We're finished." Evelyn turned slowly toward the crowd, lifting her chin. "You all see it, don't you? You see what they've done? Not just to me, not just to my husband, but to every person who trusted them." The crowd shouted back in one voice. "Yes. This is the shatter point," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "The moment when lies crack and truth shines through. My husband may be gone, but his balance was never forgotten. And today, that balance is being paid." Jamal, his voice steady despite his small frame, added, "Triple. That's what Grandpa said. If you have a balance, we'll pay triple. And guess what? We're paying it now, with truth." Phones captured every syllable. Tears streaked down the faces of strangers who hadn't even known the Turners before today. Patricia openly wept, nodding along. Jennings sat in his chair, broken by the inevitability of what was happening. Wallace muttered curses under his breath, his career flashing before his eyes. And Michael, cornered, shaking, pale, finally sank into his chair, beaten not by fists or law, but by truth and the eyes of the world. The glass walls no longer separated the bank from the people. They had been shattered, not physically, but in spirit. The fortress was gone. The shatter point had come, and nothing could put the pieces back together again. The noise outside had turned into a steady drumbeat, a rhythm of history being written in real time. The bank was no longer a place of business. It had become a stage where justice and corruption wrestled under the spotlight of countless eyes. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, Jamal at her side, Patricia holding the fragile papers that had survived years of deceit. Michael sat slumped, his arrogance stripped away, while Jennings and Wallace looked as though they were bracing for the end of their careers. But in that moment, it wasn't about them anymore. It was about Evelyn and the choice she would make. The cameras turned to her, like sunflowers chasing the sun. Every phone in the crowd seemed to know instinctively. Her decision would decide what came next. Evelyn could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest, heavier than the cane she leaned on. Revenge burned at the edges of her heart. These men had mocked her grandson, stolen from her family, spat on her legacy, and tried to bury the truth. A part of her wanted to see them broken, ruined, dragged out in handcuffs, and shamed before the world. And yet, she looked at Jamal. The boy's small face tilted upward, his eyes wide, trusting. He didn't understand the mechanics of lawsuits, arrests, and corporate downfall, but he understood what it meant to choose. "Grandma," he whispered softly, his voice barely audible over the chants. "What do we do now?" Evelyn's breath caught. For a moment, she saw not the boy beside her, but a vision of her late husband, standing tall, the memory of his gentle hand resting on her shoulder. She heard his words echo in her ears, words he'd often said when they faced hardship. "We don't just fight for ourselves, Evelyn. We fight for those who will come after." She straightened her spine, her decision made. Evelyn raised her hand, and the crowd fell into a hush. Cameras zoomed closer. Reporters at the back pushed forward, desperate to catch every word. "I could demand vengeance," she began, her voice steady. "I could drag them into the streets and let their shame feed the same cruelty they showed my family. But vengeance is easy. Justice is harder. And today, I choose justice." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, quiet but charged. Michael sat up slightly, confused, perhaps even hopeful. But Evelyn wasn't done. "These men stole from us. They mocked a child for daring to stand tall. They tried to erase what my husband built. And for years, they got away with it because no one was watching. But today, the world is watching. The truth is out, and the truth will not be silenced." She turned to Patricia, nodding at the file in her hands. "This evidence will go to the authorities. Not hidden, not bartered, not sold, but delivered into the light. And when the law does its work, it will not just be for me. It will be for every family they cheated, every customer they deceived, every person who ever walked into this bank and was treated as less than human." The crowd cheered, their roar rising like a wave. But Evelyn lifted her hand again, silencing them once more. And as for my husband's promise, I'll pay triple if you have a balance. Let me say this. His balance was never money. It was dignity, respect, legacy. And today, that balance has been paid in full. Jamal tugged her sleeve, whispering again, Grandma, what about me? What do I do? She knelt slowly, her knees stiff but her eyes soft as she looked into his. You carry it forward, baby. You carry his name with pride. You carry this moment in your heart, and you never forget that truth is stronger than lies, and justice is worth more than revenge. You are his balance now. You are the promise kept. Tears filled the boy's eyes as he nodded solemnly. He didn't understand it all, but he felt the weight of it, the sacred passing of something larger than himself. Patricia stepped forward, her voice choked but resolute. Evelyn, I'll help. I'll make sure these papers get where they need to go. I won't let them bury it again. For the first time, Evelyn smiled. It was small, tired, but real. Thank you, Patricia. Not just for the papers, but for standing with us when you didn't have to. Jennings exhaled heavily, sinking into his chair. It's over, he muttered, half to himself. They'll tear us apart. Wallace shook his head, his eyes hollow. We did this to ourselves. Michael, however, couldn't contain himself. You think this is justice? He spat, his voice hoarse. You think handing it to the courts will make them pay? They'll settle, they'll bargain, they'll walk away with golden parachutes while you go back to your little house with nothing. Evelyn stood tall, her voice ringing like steel. Maybe, but they won't walk away clean. Their names will be stained, their power shattered, their greed exposed. And that, Michael, is more than you ever expected when you mocked a little boy. The crowd thundered with approval. Outside, the chants picked up again, louder, prouder, no longer a demand but a declaration. Justice, justice, justice. And in the midst of it all, Evelyn reached for Jamal's hand. Together, they walked toward the exit, not defeated, not broken, but carrying the weight of choice. A choice that would echo far beyond these glass walls. The cameras followed them, the world watching as an old woman and a child walked out of a bank that had tried to crush them, leaving behind men who had chosen greed, and choosing instead to carry the light of justice. The courtroom was packed months later, sunlight streaming through tall windows as though heaven itself had chosen to bear witness. Every seat was filled, every hallway outside buzzing with anticipation. Reporters lined the benches, their pens ready, their cameras poised. The scandal had swept across the country like wildfire. An American bank, once untouchable, now dragged into the light because of a boy who was mocked for daring to ask about a balance. Michael sat in the defendant's chair, thinner now, his once perfect suit hanging off him like a costume from a play he no longer had the energy to perform. Jennings and Wallace sat beside him, faces gray with resignation. And behind them, rows of lawyers shuffled papers, ready to argue. But it wasn't the men at the front who drew the eyes of the crowd. It was Evelyn and Jamal, seated quietly together near the front. Evelyn wore her husband's old pin on her blouse, her hand gently clasping Jamal's. The boy had grown in the months since that fateful day. He was still only 8, but his eyes carried a maturity beyond his years. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was the reason this room was filled. The judge entered, and silence fell. Proceedings began, words of law and justice filling the air, heavy with consequence. Patricia took the stand first, her voice steady as she recounted the day she chose truth over loyalty. The papers she had saved were displayed for the court, the proof of fraud, the record of deception, the signatures of those who had thought no one would ever see. Every page read aloud was a nail in the coffin of a corrupt empire. By the time Evelyn took the stand, the tension was unbearable. She stood slowly, cane in hand, her voice calm but resonant. She spoke of her husband's dreams, of the promise that had carried their family through decades of struggle, of the day she and her grandson walked into the bank to honor a legacy, and were mocked instead. This case is not about numbers, she said firmly. It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about the balance owed to every person who has ever been told they were less, when in truth they carried more grace and more strength than the ones mocking them. The courtroom hung on her every word. Even the judge seemed to sit taller, moved by the quiet power of her testimony. When it was Jamal's turn, the room shifted. He climbed onto the witness stand, his small frame barely fitting in the seat. He fidgeted with the microphone until the judge leaned forward kindly and adjusted it for him. Then, in a soft but unwavering voice, Jamal told the truth of what happened that day. "They laughed at me," he said, his eyes flicking toward the defendants. "They said I didn't belong. But my grandma told me I did. She told me I had balance. Not money, but balance here." He touched his chest. "And I believe her." The silence afterward was so deep it felt like time itself paused. By the time closing arguments ended, there was no doubt. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and misconduct. Michael, Jennings, and Wallace would face prison, restitution, and the stripping of everything they had built on lies. The crowd erupted as the gavel fell. But Evelyn didn't celebrate. She simply closed her eyes, a single tear tracing her cheek. Justice had been served, but her heart was too wise to rejoice in another's destruction. Instead, she turned to Jamal, pulling him close, whispering, "Your grandfather would be proud." Months passed. The bank crumbled, its name dissolved, its buildings shuttered. But something else rose in its place. Evelyn, Patricia, and a coalition of community leaders came together to form a new foundation, dedicated to financial literacy and community trust. They named it the Balance Foundation, in honor of the promise Evelyn's husband had made. At its first event, Jamal stood on a small stage, holding a microphone, looking out at children his age and older. He was nervous, but Evelyn squeezed his hand from the front row, giving him strength. "My grandma told me," Jamal said, his voice strong now, "that balance isn't about money. It's about truth. It's about knowing who you are, even when people tell you different. I want all of you to know you have balance too." The crowd erupted in applause, parents wiping their eyes, children smiling with pride. Evelyn closed her eyes, her heart full. Her husband's promise lived on, not in numbers, not in bank accounts, but in a generation rising with dignity intact. As the applause faded, Evelyn whispered into the silence of her own soul, "We carried it forward. We kept the promise." And so, in the end, love had the final word. Love that outlasted greed. Love that survived humiliation. Love that passed from a grandfather to a grandmother, from a grandmother to a boy, and from that boy to the world. And that love left a lesson not just for them, but for every soul watching. True balance in life is not measured in wealth, but in dignity, legacy, and love that cannot be stolen. Now, my dear family and friends, let me leave you with this. If you were mocked, stripped of dignity, or made to feel less, would you seek revenge? Or would you, like Evelyn, choose justice and carry forward a legacy of love? Let me know in the comments below.
Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this one, then you'll absolutely love the next. It's even crazier and more captivating than you can imagine. So go ahead and click the video showing right here on your screen, and I'll see you in the next story.